Good morning, everybody. Oh, it feels so good to be back. Are you guys excited to be here? Yeah. Okay, cool. I'm feeling a little bit of energy, and I feel like I just want to make sure that you got some energy too, because let's be honest, this is the first time that you've been out of your house in 3.5 months, right? No, I'm just kidding. I hope not. But if it is, I'm glad you're here. If not, hey, I'm super bummed that we missed like 3.5 months, almost 4 months. If we had waited another week or two, it would have been 4 months since we last met here. And up until the Thursday before we came back, the Thursday before the last Sunday that we didn't meet, we had plans to meet. All that to say, basically, 2.5 days before the last Sunday that we didn't have, or the first Sunday that we didn't have 3.5 months ago. We were planning to do everything up until 2.5 days before things canceled. So it's kind of crazy that's everything changed just at a moment's notice. But here we are, we're back, we're excited to be together, we're excited to worship together, we're excited to spend time together and to study God's Word together. So before we get started, would you guys just bow your heads and pray with me? And Father, I thank you so much for this day, and I thank you for the opportunity that we have to gather together and just to embark on a new series, a new chapter in our lives. And as we get ready for school here in another month or so, I ask that you would just help us to come to the reboot, come to the restart, ready with our eyes focused on you for the ways that you have for us. We thank you for your Son. It's in His name that we pray. Amen. All right, so I got a question for you guys. Who do you think is the most famous person on earth? Okay, I want you to turn to the person next to you. Who do you think is the most famous person on earth? Go, you got 10 seconds. Everybody got an answer? All right, what were your answers? Just shout them out.
Jesus. Dr. Phil.
Jesus, Dr. Phil. Who else? Amazon person. Okay. Donald Trump. Okay. Any athletes, anybody? Chris Pratt. He's not. Yeah. What? Yeah, Gandhi. Okay. So there's a lot of famous people. What's interesting is I asked you guys who you think is the most famous person on earth. That's a trick question because nobody's going to say the same answer. You notice how everybody had different answers for who you think the most famous person on earth. Some of you listed people that were current celebrities. You can look at their Instagram, see how many followers they have, all that kind of stuff. Some of you listed people that were from, generations ago, but we're still talking about them today. And those are all good answers. There's no right answer probably because, there is a right answer, but for your answers, the purpose that I asked for you to give me your answers on who you think is the most famous person on earth, my point was simply that each one of us has a different idea about what's important. If you're not into sports, then, Steph Curry probably is not high on your list. If you're not into, other things like good music, then probably some singers are not on your list. But many of you, maybe if you're not well read or you don't pay attention during history class, then there's some names that you just don't think about that are ancient names that are probably more well known than any name today. But the reality is we all have different ideas on what's important. Therefore, we have different ideas on who is important. And so because of those different ideas, it's important to know that, and recognize that what's important to you will have influence on you. Okay, so case in point. When I was in high school, actually still today, my favorite band of all time is Switchfoot. And if you don't know Switchfoot, I challenge you to go on Spotify and listen to them later today because it's awesome and it'll change your life. And they've been around for over 20 years. So you have different genres of music you could listen to within the Switchfoot genre itself. Anyway, for a Father's Day gift, Chelsea gave me a online ticket to watch they had a fundraiser concert that they did. It was on a stage, it was with live production and stuff, and I got to watch it live with thousands of people all over the world, and it was the perfect Father's Day gift. Also because she made me pizza rolls and bagel bites, and I haven't had those since middle school, and that was awesome. So it was great. But growing up in high school, Switchfoot was known, he had this long blonde hair, he's from California, and so I, of course, when I graduated from my restricting high school who had a dress code and I couldn't grow my hair out, as soon as I graduated high school, I grew my hair out because I wanted to be like John Foreman of Switchfoot. And he had that influence on me. I wanted to be a rocker. It was pretty awesome. I don't have a picture for you because I'm not that. He's much better looking than I am, and didn't want to distract you guys. So anyway, so there's things that influence us. Most of you have people that you look up to, whether they're real people or people that you follow on Instagram or people that you just see in the news or people in general. If you got a man crush on Chris Pratt, then I understand that. I do too. And maybe you're influenced by him a little bit, but that's not such a bad thing because he's a Christian. But what's important to us is often what influences us. And while we're talking about influence, let's talk about what it is. So I'm going to define influence as the ability to affect someone else's behavior, thoughts, or choices. Are we all in agreement on that one? I think I've got it on the screen. Yeah. Influence is the ability to affect someone's behavior, thoughts, or choices. So in the example I gave you, John Foreman's ability to affect my behavior in growing out my hair after high school shows that he had influence on me. So there's different things like that. And many of us, we would probably agree to the idea when sometimes it's hard to define influence. It's kind of like love. You can't you can put it into some words, but you know it when you see it, right? You know it when you see it first and foremost. And that's why I think Jesus said you should be known by your love for one another. But most of us, we have a hard time defining how we see influence. And so, but we know when we see it. And so it's easy for us to see and probably all agree that popular people have influence. Would you guys agree with that statement? Popular people have influence, whether they're people in your school or they're, again, celebrities or just people that have been known throughout all of history. Some people are popular for great reasons. Some people are popular for some not great reasons. But popular people tend to have a lot of influence. Did you know when it comes to brand management and advertising dollars, companies in the last 5 years have made this dramatic shift to where they almost direct more money towards social influencers, people who have big platforms on Instagram or YouTube. They get paid. If you follow people on YouTube, you've probably heard them talk about this, but they get paid a lot of money sometimes to sponsor a product because they have a lot of influence. They know that the people who subscribe to their channel and watch them or follow them on Instagram have a high probability of buying their products. So popular people on social platforms, even brands recognize the influence they have and pay them a lot of money to promote certain products. Influence is definitely noticeable within those who are popular, but what a lot of us fail to recognize is that each and every one of us have been given a certain measure of influence over the people around us. Now, where we can get tripped up is we don't recognize the fact that we actually have influence on the people around us, and therefore we neglect to watch our own example or to live our lives in such a way that we would want others to follow in our footsteps. Sometimes we act selfishly and because we don't recognize that truth. But here's the funny thing about influence is a lot of us wonder if we have much of it. Some of us, maybe you're not quite sure what you have to offer. And so you don't think you have a whole lot of influence because, who listens to me? I'm just, I'm a new fifth grader, going into a new school. Who's going to listen to me? And you may think, I might not have a whole lot of influence. Or maybe, you think I've been around these people for a long time and they know me, they know everything about me, even the bad parts about me, so I probably don't have much influence on them. And a lot of times we don't recognize how much influence we might have. Maybe you wonder how much influence you truly have because you aren't quite sure what you have to offer. Maybe you struggle with the fear of failure. How many of you've wrestled with you've decided not to do something because you were afraid of failing and people taking notice to that? So oftentimes we step away from our role as an influencer because of our fear of failure. Maybe the pressure of influence is just too much for you. Maybe you know the good things that you should do or the things that you should stop doing, but it's too hard, it's difficult, and so that pressure might get to you. And some of you still, maybe you never even really thought about it. The word influence or the idea that you might have some of it, who cares? You don't really think about that ever, and that's fine. You just don't seem to think about it, or it never occurred to you that maybe you have the power to influence those around you. We tend to think of influence as this big, unattainable thing. Would you guys agree? A lot of times, especially for me, I think, well, what can I do, right? It's this big, this unattainable idea, having influence. It's something that we can't seem to reach for ourselves, but we know it when other people have it because we recognize it in them, or we want to be like them, or we want to follow them, or we see other people following them. But somehow we miss the potential that we have to influence others by making it this big, unattainable thing. The reality is that each and every one of us have been given a measure of influence that we can have on the people around us. And questioning if we have the power to influence is not a new thing. It's something that people have struggled with ever since people were around, ever since the beginning of time. We don't recognize sometimes the influence that God has given us, but Jesus was one. Some of you said Jesus, maybe because you really think that, maybe because it's what you're supposed to say in church, I don't know. But I would agree with you. I think Jesus was probably the most influential person who ever walked the face of the earth. And I think that because he was God. And so we have history books and we have documents that have documented his life more so than anybody else in history. More than anybody else in the history of the world, there are more documentation on the person of Jesus than there is anybody else. So why is this? Jesus had a ton of influence on the people that were around him. And we know that because when we study the Gospels, and these are documents, 4 of the most popular documents that people have recorded of his life from as far as 2,000 years ago almost. And Jesus had a ton of influence, not only because we're still reading about him, but because you can even see the evidence in those documents about the people that followed him, the people that heard about him. And this was before Instagram, obviously, so nobody could just follow him on Instagram, but they literally followed him, like following him from town to town, watching him do miracles, watching him teach and listening to what he had to say about God the Father. And his teaching was so captivating, he had so much influence on people. And the account that we're going to look at today speaks to that. When this story picks up, Jesus was focused on one thing in particular. And if you've grown up in church, maybe you've heard this story. But he was teaching and this crowd was following him. And there were thousands of people there. And Jesus was concerned about one thing, and that was feeding them. They begin to grumble. You guys know, like on Sunday mornings when your stomach starts doing that thing and you're like, oh, I'm so hungry. When are we getting out of here? When are we going to eat some food, get some lunch, right? Even if it's like 9:30 in the morning and you're like, I'm ready to get some lunch because you're up early and you're at church and you're sitting there and you're like, I want food. So this is where we pick up in the story, and the people are grumbling towards Jesus. They're like, hey, when's the sermon going to be over? We're hungry. And Jesus says this. Then Andrew, or this is what happens when the story picks up. Then Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, spoke up. There's a young boy here with 5 barley loaves and 2 fish. But what good is that with this huge crowd? And tell everyone to sit down, Jesus said. So they all sat down on the grassy slopes. The men alone numbered 5,000. Can you imagine how many people were actually there if you start counting the women and the children too? This is a lot of people. Some scholars estimate up to 15 to 20,000 people. That might be a little high in my personal estimation, but there's needless to say, thousands and thousands of people here gathered in this crowd. And some bread and fish from one boy's uneaten lunch is not enough to feed that many people. And so the disciples are bringing Jesus this boy's food, and it doesn't seem like much. But what I want you to recognize is that Jesus saw that this boy had something to give, and he chose to use it to make an impact. The boy didn't have a lot, but Jesus saw what he did have, and he chose to use it in order to make a big impact. And hold that thought, because we'll come back to that. By doing that, Jesus made this boy's lunch into way more. And this is what happens next. Then Jesus took the loaves, gave thanks to God, and distributed it to the people. And afterward, he did the same with the fish. They all ate so much, as they wanted. After everyone was full, Jesus told the disciples, now gather the leftovers so that nothing is wasted. So they picked up the pieces and filled 12 baskets with scraps left by the people who had eaten from the 5 barley loaves. And that's where people saw this miraculous sign and were amazed and thought, this has got to be a prophet straight from God. And it's because Jesus did this miracle with just one little boy's lunch, and he feeds all these people. Now, if you've heard that story before, it's easy to be like, okay, yeah, Jesus feeds a lot of people. Wow, okay, thanks. You've been on my Facebook or something. Yeah, that was my Switchfoot influence. It's not blonde, but it did the trick back then. Thank you for always somehow finding that picture in the middle of when I'm talking. All right. Well, Less than the influence that had. This little boy, my point is, if you've heard this story, it's easy to just like let this fly over your head and think, okay, yeah, Jesus feed 5,000 people, that's cool, it's an awesome miracle. But the reality is, what I want you to notice this time around hearing this story is that when Jesus saw one person that had just a little bit of stuff and was willing to give it up for God, God used it and made a huge impact. Each and every one of you have been given some measure of influence with the people around you. And you don't have to know exactly what that is yet. You don't have to know exactly like how much influence you have on people. What you do have to know is that if you give what you have, your life up to God, He will use it in some pretty powerful ways. Some of the biggest names in history, some of the people who have changed the most throughout the entire world, who have built orphanages, who've started the Red Cross, people who came from nothing, and people who had a humble reputation, didn't seem to have much to offer, chose to give of what they had, and it has changed the face of this earth forever. That has been the heritage of our Christianity. Jesus saw that a boy had something to give, and He chose to use it to make an impact. And He can use you just as you are. He can use you and the influence that you have. He can use whatever you have to do big things. Now, I say that because you guys are about to enter back into society after a season of not being around a whole lot of people. Maybe you had just a few friends that you got to hang out with after a while, and maybe you haven't spent much time with hardly anybody since this whole pandemic began. I don't even know what your situation is, but what I do know is that everything is starting to open back up. Your schools are going to be opening up soon. And you will have a measure of influence afforded to you that God has given you. And how you choose to live your life can forever impact the people around you. God can use your life and make a huge impact that changes and it changes generations to come. And the ramifications can go far beyond our own comprehension. You don't have to be popular or well-known or famous to have an influence. You just have to be faithful. You just have to be faithful in living out the life that God has called you to live. You don't have to be, the coolest person. You don't have to be the person with the most swag. You don't have to be the person who puts down other people in order to gain popularity. You can be the person that God designed you to be and have a tremendous impact. You simply have to be willing to let Jesus use what you have. And Jesus can use whatever you have to do big things. So begin to recognize the influence that you have. If you begin to recognize areas, maybe it's a little sibling. Maybe it's the person that you thought was super annoying, but maybe God has put them on your heart to go and make an impact in their life. Maybe all they need is a little love and care. Maybe there's, maybe some of you are in Stuco or in class presidency election runnings and student government. That's the word I'm looking for. Some of you are in student government, and some of you maybe are thinking about getting into that. Maybe some of you are the captain of a team or a part of a team, and you have the ability to influence others' behavior by the way you carry yourself. You can set the example through good sportsmanship. There's so many ways that God has given you opportunities in wherever you are at to have influence on those around you. Even if it is just one person for now, God has given you each a measure of influence. So be willing to do something with what you have to offer. As we kind of wrap up, I want you to think about this question. Is what's one area that I have influence on? Maybe it's something that I mentioned a minute ago. Maybe it's something completely different. I don't know. But what is one area that you do know that you have some influence in? If you don't know, ask for those around you to help you point it out. Ask your small group leader. Ask whatever and seek what it is that maybe God is grooming you to influence other people with. Maybe God has given you some giftings that you don't even recognize in yourself yet, but those around you can see. Use the people around you. Use your small group leaders, the mentors that are ahead of you in life, and allow them to help you see if you don't see. But what's one area that I have influence in? I love you guys. I'm so glad that we're able to meet together again. I'm going to go and pray, and then you guys will divide up into small groups.